Friends, it is February 25, 2026. Grab a coffee or a tea or an energy drink or a water, whatever you need to join with me in this VPC Daily Devotional. We are in the Gospel of Luke. We're in chapter 5, and we are at dinner with Jesus at a party at the home of Levi, or Matthew, who was a tax collector, gave up his job in order to follow Jesus, and then threw a party for his friends. But we find out there's other people there. Verse 30, the Pharisees who were watching this party, and their scribes, the scribes were like legal scholars, were complaining to his disciples and saying, "Why do you eat with and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" So the first thing you have to understand is that in the Middle East, people didn't lock their doors predominantly. They left their doors open, and there wasn't a kind of a mental distinction between the public and private life. Most occupations were agrarian, so they took place out of the home. People worked from home, so to speak, as we would say now, but they weren't digital. But the people who were invited to a party would have also expected, in this day and age, that if they had an honored guest, like Jesus was the honored guest at Matthew's house, that he would invite his friends, but that the door would be open, that other people from the public could come in. It wasn't expected that Matthew would entertain them all by giving them food, but they could come in and listen to the conversation. Remember, there's no reality TV. This is reality TV in the first century. You get to listen to a teacher teach and have an encounter with people. And so there was a bunch of other people, and prominent among that group were Pharisees and legal experts in the Torah. And what's so fascinating about that is they didn't want to associate with anyone except themselves either. They were like the tax collectors. The tax collectors didn't choose that isolation. The Pharisees did choose isolation because they thought people that weren't as scrupulous as they were in the law, following all the 600 specifications of that law, were unrighteous and unclean. They didn't want to have anything to do with those people, let alone the tax. They'd never go to be related to a tax collector unless they'd be contaminated, guilt by association. And yet they're fascinated enough with Jesus that they want to see what he's doing, and they kind of want to be there to criticize him for engaging in the act of eating with sinners. And it comes across as a question, why are you doing this? But it's really an accusation. We can make a question pretty hostile if we want. And this was a hostile question because in the Middle East, eating together, and even today, certainly there in the Middle East today, but even in many other cultures, eating together it's a signal of friendship and acceptance and connection. Jesus made friends, let's face it, with many people who were in stark contrast, who lived in a way that was in contrast or over against the ethics of the Torah, which was his Bible. And so these Pharisees saw this behavior as incomprehensible. To them, associating with flagrantly unrighteous people was a direct threat to your own moral purity. It could be taken it could also be taken by some as indirect approval of this waywardness that among like tax collectors and prostitutes and others. And many Christians today fall into this same outlook. Their fear that they'll be led astray, right? That befriending unbelievers might imply acceptance of pagan practices. But Jesus approached, as we're going to learn, moral and spiritual problems the way a doctor approaches physical ones. He wanted to help and to heal people spiritually, morally. He wanted to bring life where there was death and clarity where there's confusion. And he wanted to get people back on the path, and that meant associating with them. I wonder if you've ever seen non-Christians within a Christian circle treated as people to be avoided. Let's take a moment and pray. Lord, help us to understand that your call to holiness is not separation from people who are strangers to grace, but as fruitful connection. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen.